And good evening, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to my channel. It's called McDuff Lives 2. And boy, I've got a complicated, but I think meaningful show lined up for you tonight. I had a good time this morning reading from the last chapter. I'm not done with the book, but I'm about halfway through the last chapter of How the Nation Was Won. And as we get toward the French and Indian War, we start to get into familiar territory where we're used to. You read about the French and Indian War in high school, probably, and so we've covered a great gap from the 1600s all the way up until about 1740 right now. A little bit further to go, and then we'll have to say goodbye to that book. But it's been a real pleasure. Um, Another pleasure is, let's start with the Tavistock Institute. That's where we spoke about that at the last Mindfield. So it transitions right into this, and I'm going to, Andy, if you forgive me, I'm going to share my screen for a second. And I think this is just a tremendous thing that ties so much together for me, and I'll explain to you why. Many of you will see it right away. How George Shultz Became a Tavistock Brainwasher by Richard Cohen, Washington Bureau Chief, EIR, Executive Intelligence Review. It's another treasure from the LaRouche organization that provides it there at LaRouchePub.com. And, I was looking for material on Tavistock, and there it is. Now, those of you that follow me know that George Shultz was my father's uh, evil doppelganger, if you'll forgive me for saying such a bad thing about someone who's passed away. But doggone it, they were they were on the same football team at Loomis, but one went one way and one went another way. And I think that George Shultz, especially now that we know that he was involved in Tavistock, took a more active part behind the scenes in my father's life and perhaps in the demise of my father than we have considered so far. The article itself is good. You can see right there, it says, after attending the Anglophile Loomis School in Connecticut, George obtained a BA in economics at Princeton following 3 years of service in the Marine Corps during World War II. And by the way, he was not with the same group with my father, but they were both in the Pacific War, let's put it that way. And he was after the war at MIT. And what did I do? Did I just lose that? Anyway, let me just finish that one thought. In 1945, the year Schultz arrived at MIT, the Tavistock Institute's Kurt Lewin set up the notorious Research Center for Group Dynamics on the MIT campus. The Research Center, which set up shop permanently at the University of Michigan in the following year, hello, David Underdown, was and still is a direct U.S. affiliate of the London Tavistock Institute Brainwashing Center. Included in Lewin's original MIT grouping were top graduates of the World War II Strategic Bombing Survey. We talked about that the other night, later to be reorganized as the RAND Corporation. Well, it's not my intention to read the whole article, but I suggest that you read it. Most of this is about labor relations and how George Shultz was able to economize by concentrating on the human factors in production, i.e., how to cut down on distractions and, to get the most out of your people. This association with W. Allen Wallace is also significant. No account of how the earlier period in Schultz's career development signifies what may be expected from him as Secretary of State. Of course, this is prospective back when this was written in 1982. could be complete without reference to his friendship with W. Allen Wallace, who was serving as the dean of the University of Chicago's Graduate School of Business when Schultz moved his base of operations to that institution in 1957. Wallace launched his public career in the 1932 Conference on Eugenics at the New York Museum of Natural History, where he delivered a paper attempting to prove the racial superiority of the Nordic race by statistical means. Okay, so this is full of great references that can help us understand why this really this is almost a blockbuster to me in understanding the polar differences between the folks that went the Schultz way and the folks that went the McDuff way. And I would say that 99% of the country goes the McDuff way, but the ones that go with Schultz are the ones that have the power because they are willing to indulge and do indulge in what most of us would call abhorrent, immoral, treacherous activity. Which is why once I did a show about Triumph of the Will, Triumph des Willens, the quote, great film of Leni Riefenstahl, because that's what the triumph of the will is. It's you're saying, you know, I want something so bad that I'm going to break all the bounds of morality just because I want it. And that's what Hitler said. He said, "We want this. We want the greater Germany. You know, we don't like being all hemmed in here in the middle of this cold and rainy Europe. You know, we want to have a whole lot of Lebensraum. We need to stretch our legs, stretch out. Pardon me. So there you go. I mean, there's more stuff in here. It's hard to stop. Um, there's little doubt that Schultz's recent appointment as U.S. Secretary of State was engineered by the European-centered Malthusians and their Swiss-based Bank for International Settlements to position Schultz and his good friend Henry Kissinger to complete the job Schultz initiated during the course of the Nixon and Ford administrations. Okay. So there you go. Now, from Tavistock, let's go back in time to this book that I got. It's called, sorry about that. There, you can see it now. Behind the Dictators. A factual analysis of the relationship of Nazi fascism and Roman Catholicism by Leo H. Lehman. Now, the first thing that's astonishing about this book is that it was published in 1942. Okay, that's the year my dad graduated from Harvard and joined the Navy. So this is right at the beginning of the American portion of World War II. And I'm going to open up at chapter 4. And the caption here is the title of my show tonight. It's The Reestablishment of the Holy Roman Empire. Okay. Now this is going to be fun. What was the Holy Roman Empire? So we all start in the same place. Okay. The Holy Roman Empire was the result of the division of power between the emperor and the Pope. And it was the result of wars and a settlement. And part of that settlement, the Pope got land, a lot of land. He got the whole central stripe of Italy and other stuff. So he became what's called a temporal ruler. In other words, he's not just a spiritual leader, he's also like a monarch or an emperor. But due to details that I'm not going to go into, there developed a split between the Pope and the title of emperor, where by the 1500s, 1600s, the Habsburgs had basically become the Holy Roman Emperors, and they are the ones that ruled both Spain, one branch, um, and Austro-Hungary, the German Empire, the Hungarian Empire, um, and out of Vienna, which is Vienna, Austria, a Catholic stronghold. The center of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was the controlling part of the Holy Roman Empire. And so it was through that that the smaller German states, well, some of them, half of them maybe, were controlled under this empire. And between the military control of the empire by the emperor, who, as I said, was often a Habsburg, and the control of the church, and that means the money system really, and the people, the pulpit, 'cause, and education and all of that, by the Pope, they were able to maintain a nice, comfortable living for that 1% that went on for maybe 1,000 years. And so when they lost it in the unification of Germany in 1871, Uh, there was a lot of nostalgia among the people, especially the Catholic Church, which liked to have that power. And so they made a negotiation eventually with Mussolini to say, well, we want to have our land back. And they gave him a little postage stamp of land called the Vatican. But in exchange for that, they basically supported the fascists and in turn the Nazis also. Why? Well, because the goal is the reestablishment of the Holy Roman Empire. And that's the purpose of my reading this fourth chapter from this book tonight, Behind the Dictators. By the way, Leo H. Lehman is not one of the Lehman brother bankers. He's from Northern Ireland. The reestablishment of the Holy Roman Empire. Europe's tragedy, in Catholic opinion, is due to the breakup of its great papal-controlled confederation of states by the Protestant Reformation. Okay, it's the great big fight between the Reformation. We've talked about it with the Jesuits and rulers of evil. Um, the division of Christendom by virtue of people rebelling against it and becoming Protestants. All the efforts of the Catholic Church since have been directed to the work of counter-Reformation, to reestablish the political and social order of pre-Reformation times. That order of states was hierarchical, not democratic, and was ruled at the top by the dual sovereignty of Pope and Emperor and by the union of church-state authority. The political and social order that resulted from the Reformation, both in Europe and America, is regarded by the Catholic Church as pagan and anti-Christian. They give it the name of pseudo-democracy. Now, again, I want to make a statement here, and that is the Catholic Church that I knew as a kid did not think this way, as far as I knew. Maybe they did at the top, but and then of course I was raised before Vatican II, but then after Vatican II, all the Catholics became just as nice as Protestants, right around here. But no, not in Europe. In Europe, they still are exerting this completely different attitude of superiority and temporal power that they want back. At least part of them want back, and the major faction that wants it back is the Jesuits. This is to be found in all official Catholic writings and is the burden of all papal encyclicals. The Jesuit weekly America, for instance, remember we're reading this from 1942, tells us that the evils of our present time are to be ascribed to this pseudo democracy, which is pagan and in its remote origins and leads to an inhuman wage system, an uprooted proletariat, and pauperism. It goes on further to say Protestant, rationalist, and now definitely anti Christian in its inspiration, its logical fruit is socialism and calls for, quote, a return to an integral social order the principles of which are still preserved in our languid memory of the great medieval experiment, unquote. Our languid memory. Remember the show I did about William and Mary and watching the movie, The Story of a Patriot? And we talked about the Queen Elizabeth's motto, which is also the motto of Prince George's County, right where I grew up. And it is Semper Eadem, which simply is Latin for meaning always the same. That's what they're talking about, an integral social order, the principles of which are still preserved in our memory of the great medieval experiment. Medieval, the Dark Ages, the time when nobody was educated, when everybody was, you know, anonymous, dirty, um, abused, uh, cannon fodder, just a time of human misery as far as history tells us. Those are the good old days for the Holy Roman Empire. Few realize how intense is the hatred of official Roman Catholic spokesmen for the American democratic way of life. This same Jesuit magazine, America, which advertises itself as the most influential Catholic magazine in the United States, published the following in its issue of May 17th, 1941, 6 months before Pearl Harbor. Quote, how we Catholics have loathed and despised this Lucifer civilization, this rationalist creation of those little men who refuse to bend the knee or bow the head in submission to higher authority. Today, American Catholics are being asked to shed their blood for that particular kind of secularist civilization which they have been heroically repudiating for 4 centuries. This civilization is now called democracy, and the suggestion is being made that we send the Yanks to Europe again to defend it. In reality, is it worth defending? What's the sum and substance of it all? All the Yanks in America will not save it from disintegration unless a miracle occurs. It is doomed, finally and irrevocably doomed. The new order in Europe will be either a Nazi or a British totalitarianism, or a combination of both. Now, that's not finishing the quote, but I have to stop and say the new order in Europe will be either a Nazi or a British totalitarianism or a combination of both. Well, after World War II, the British totalitarianism that is exerting itself through the um, the establishment side of the American politics, uh, the skull and bones side, and the Nazi side don't look all that different to me anymore. American democracy is disintegrating, crumbling from within. Fatigue, disillusionment, disgust, the unbearable tension in society, the fear of war and the fear of bankruptcy, the absence of security, the technological revolution, which has gone far beyond the instruments of social control. Deep rooted, anarchistic hatred of a social order, which has too long denied the principle of social justice, the revolt of the masses and the leveling of all values, the absence of any common ethical basis. These are but a few of the multiple factors in the decline which is now upon us. Can you believe he wrote that in 1942? And it sounds like it fits today perfectly, does it not? Especially when he says denied the principle of social justice. Come on now. This whole social justice thing is nothing new. It's all part of the material that they have to work with. Get a degree in social justice. All right. Leadership in this crisis will not come from the laity. It will not come from the bottom of the Catholic pyramid. Pyramid. Hello? It will only come from the top, from the hierarchy. The Christian revolution will begin when we decide to cut loose from the existing social order rather than be buried with it. Unquote. That's a justice of a New York court named O'Brien, writing in the Jesuit magazine America on May 17th, 1941, 6 months before Pearl Harbor. And what is he calling for? Cut loose from the existing social order. What is World Economic Forum fathead uh, Klaus Schwab calling for? The reset, the great reset. Cut loose from the existing social order. Okay. Now, Klaus Schwab, Switzerland, Ravensburg. Yes, part of the Holy Roman Empire. It comes from the Holy Roman Empire. So he was born in the Holy Roman Empire. Now, here we're back to the text by Leo Lehman. Let me read a little more. Whatever opinion the Catholic Church may now express about Hitler and his Nazi socialism, it stands 100% with him and the other fascist dictators in this avowed objective of destroying the political and social order that came out of the Reformation and substituting, therefore, an integral, positive Christian hierarchical confederation of states, similar to that which existed before Protestantism disrupted the authoritarian order of things in Central Europe. Quote, no, that's not a quote. Hitler laid it down in Article 24 of his National Socialist Party program that, quote, the party as such starts from the standpoint of a positive Christianity. This is specifically a Jesuit principle of action, with the ultimate objective of inducing all Christian sects to unite with the Catholic Church for a Christian reform of states, the establishment of an hierarchical grouping of corporative states entirely devoid of Jewish, Masonic, and Protestant influence. Bishop Hudal and other German prelates have pointed out the identity of the fundamentals of National Socialism and Catholicism. To date, Hitler's blitzkriegs are accomplishing, in fact, everything set forth in his ideological concepts for a, quote, new order in all of Europe after his ruthless extermination of Judaism and Masonry. For centuries, Vatican policy has based all its hopes for the restoration of its dominion over the nations of Europe upon a strong militaristic Germany that would cleanse the continent of all British Protestant influence from the West, and above all, safeguard it from a Russo Slavic invasion from the East. A greater Germany, in other words, must be made again the center of a revived Holy Roman Empire. It is significant that Pope Leo XIII, and I put him up, Leo XIII, I put him up on my Twitter. It's amazing. He looks just like Joe Lieberman. I mean, you know, all right, that's just me. Urged this very plan upon the late Kaiser Wilhelm II. Remember Kaiser Wilhelm, Bill de Blasio's, Secret Santa, right? During the latter's last visit to the Vatican, the Kaiser, in his memoirs, vividly describes the colorful and solemn setting in which the interview took place and says that he jotted down what was said for future reference. What interested him most was Pope Leo's insistence that, by war if necessary, the Holy Roman Empire should be restored. Now remember, Leo the 13th is between, what, about 1885 and 1902 or 3? So this is some time ago. But he says the Holy Roman Empire should be restored, and that to this end, quote, Germany must become the sword of the Catholic Church, unquote. Hitler succeeded the Kaiser, and by Germany's military might wiped out from all Europe popular government, Freemasonry, and all the democratic freedoms against which Pope Leo XIII and other 19th century popes fulminated their condemnations. Catholic propagandists in the United States, despite expressed opinion to the contrary, have not been unaware of this identity of interest between Nazi fascism and Catholic aims, and diplomatically but definitely have been striving for their realization. Hitler's early conquests in Austria and Czechoslovakia were applauded as a natural readjustment in Europe by the Catholic Justice Herbert O'Brien of New York in an article featured in the New York Herald Tribune, March 29, 1938. Taking occasion to warn the United States from participating in a war on the side of England and France, Justice O'Brien stated that a war would be unjust, since its objective would be to oppose certain political adjustments and changes in Central Europe, resulting in economic and nationalistic confederations which had existed for generations before the Great World Conflict, and also to resist that great confederation of small groups which, up to the breaking out of the Great World War, had enjoyed under the beneficial sway of the Habsburgs, commercial prosperity, independence, and peace. He wrote that the dismemberment of the Austrian Empire was the most tragic blunder of the 20th century. When England and France chopped up Austria, they ruined Europe. He applauded Hitler's success in destroying the British hegemony in Central Europe and in securing a return to the political and social setup of the corporate union of states in a revived Holy Roman Confederation. Quote, what America is witnessing is the normal reunion of these several parts into the original living structure. It had come. It had to come. It could not be blocked. Injustice to the 100 million people of Central Europe. Why should anyone try to prevent it? So, what the Catholic Church is hoping and working for as a result of the present death struggle between the fascist and democratic blocs is the reestablishment in Europe of the real state, quote unquote, a rigid hierarchical system wherein inferiors are subject to superiors. In this system, each individual, like a cell in a body, must humbly submit to his fate and occupy his, quote, natural place, unquote. Remember, semper eadem, which is allotted to him from birth. You know, We can trace that now back to Diocletian if we want to, from with the help of Webster Tarpley. But there it is. The idea that you're going to be the same station that your father was, that his father was, on and on and on, and nothing's going to ever change. And have no desire to get away from it. This basis of social structure is not only anti Jewish, but also anti Protestant. It corresponds exactly to the system of the Jesuit order itself, as founded by Ignatius Loyola, the essential point of which consists in a hierarchical structure of ideas, and is characteristic of all Catholic political thought. The hierarchical, as opposed to the Protestant democratic system, holds that the different races constitute the hierarchical steps in a cosmic system which no one has the right to change or modify either by individual or collective will. The Jesuit Father Muckerman, in his many works on race hygiene, yeah, hi, hello, eugenics. So you're part of this discussion too. Fully explains this ideology, which is at the basis of all the arms and acts of Nazi fascism. Mixture of races, he holds, produces inharmonious descendants who have difficulty in allowing themselves to be absorbed in a national unity. It is well known that mixture of races brings forth strong individualities, and these, in the Jesuit view, would disrupt the static harmony they desire among peoples and nations, as well as nullify the gregarious instinct which the Jesuits endeavored to foster. In their view, harmony is a state in which each places himself humbly and voluntarily in the organic niche appointed for him by the supreme authority, without any diabolic inharmonious desire to leave it. This is the way the Jesuit order itself is built up, and this is the ideal Catholic aim for states and groups of states in the political and social order. It is the organic, static, hierarchical, integralist, corporative system of Nazi fascist teaching, which is already in effect in many countries of Europe. It is in direct opposition to the disintegralist, dynamic, liberal, free, democratic concept of political and social order. The identity of interest between Nazi fascism and Jesuit Catholicism in the matter of opposition to the mixture of races and religions is something that cannot be denied. And this ideology is the prime cause of the war that is devastating the world at the present time. Hitler, the fanatic, has already gone a long way to bring it to realization. If he succeeds in making it permanent, the new order, which he has vowed to bring about in Europe, will be what the Catholic Church has been strenuously working for during the past 4 centuries. As a result, Europe will be entirely free of that pseudo democratic liberalism so hateful to official Catholicism. With or without Hitler, as Justice O'Brien says, it had to come, and its beginnings could only have been accomplished by the ruthless war now being waged by Nazi fascism, a fact which its Jesuit proponents have fully realized during their centuries of Counter Reformation activities. But it's only by facing this fact and forgetting Roman Catholic propaganda in our daily newspapers that we can understand why a victory for an authoritarian Germany, not its crushing defeat by the Democratic allies, has been fervently desired by the Vatican. Well, that's got to be breathtaking, especially if you're a Catholic. But it's a completely different Catholic Church back then. This is Pacelli. This is Pius XII. And yes, he's with the black nobility. He's with the bankers of Babylon. They're this is the dark side of Catholicism for sure. So let's not worry about, it's the whole church or anything. But I want to tie this now in with the mention of the infamous Count Coudenhove Kalergi. Where is it? Coudenhove Kalergi, Coudenhove hyphen Kalergi, Kaleergi. Now, he is the guy that is credited with the idea of synarchism. Bill Taylor and I were talking about synarchism the other day on Twitter, and s- and when we talk about synarchism, what we're talking about is exactly what George Shultz wants. It's what the Tavistock Institute wants. It's what NATO wants. It's what the Catholic Church wants, or the Vatican wants. And it is what the Jesuits are fighting for. And, and let's also mention the idea of corporatism, because that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing the idea of corporate bodies, corporations, and foundations having more power than governments. And that's been the pattern for many years. So if you have a bunch of corporate bodies that are all subservient to one internal master, or one internal, small elite governing body, that's synarchism. And what's the difference between that and what I just read about? It's the same thing. This is the ongoing fight, now in the form of the World Economic Forum. The Great Reset is simply the new order. It's the same thing. So, okay, we read from Charles Higgum's Trading with the Enemy, the Nazi American money plot, in which Charles Higgum identified the fraternity, which was a network of the Rockefeller-controlled Standard Oil and First National City Bank, or the Chase National Bank. The director of Standard Oil was William Avery Rockefeller Jr., who was a co-founder with his older brother John D. of the prominent United States Rockefeller family. He married the daughter of First National City Bank President James Jewett Stillman. William was also a member of Skull and Bones. The society was founded after William H. Russell traveled to Germany in the early 1830s and befriended the leader of an insidious German secret society that hailed the death's head as its logo and derived from 18th century society, the Illuminati. When he returned to the United States, he and Alphonso Taft, the president of U.S. President, the father of President William Howard Taft, founded the society, which they called the Brotherhood of Death, or the Order of Skull and Bones. The Skull and Bones was the dominant American chapter of the International Brotherhood of Death secret societies, and that included the Nazis' Tula Society, the Thule, Thule, or I say Tula Society, which is about the uh, mystical pre civilization. I won't try to describe it now. It's you can read about it. Uh, Skull and Bones, the most powerful secret society in the United States that the United States has ever known, and that the society has been dominated by about 24 of the country's most influential families, including the Bush, Bundy, Harriman, Lord, Phelps, Rockefeller, Taft, and Whitney families, who are encouraged to intermarry amongst themselves. Like pharaohs, right? The Nazis and the Bonesmen were joined together through synarchism, which the U.S. Army, State Department, and FBI files from the World War II period labeled synarchist/Nazi-communist because of their use simultaneously of both purportedly opposing ideologies. Hello? You know, simultaneously both purportedly opposing ideologies, pro-communism and the extreme right, toward the encroachment of a targeted government. St. Eve's followers had finally decided to use more stealthy means by infiltrating their members into key positions in political and economic institutions, intending on creating, in the words of Richard Koisel, a specialist in 20th century French political history, a world government by an initiated elite. Well, now you see the importance of synarchism. Synarchism draws together the Habsburg Holy Roman Empire want to reinvigorate the Middle Ages folks, the Klaus Schwabs, with the Prince Charleses, right? With the establishment, with the Bundys and the Harrimans and the Bushes. Yeah. So that the Protestants, the enemy of the Catholics, right? We hates those Protestants, and they hates the Catholics. Remember the gunpowder plot? Don't forget. Well, how much is that as a school play at this point? Hair pulling. So, but what are they doing now? They're working together, both on the side of synarchism. And synarchism is the restoration of the hierarchical totalitarian system, whether you call it the Freemasonic pyramid or the Roman Empire. There's another interesting thing. This one will interest Aaron Adler and others interested in Zionism. Coudenhove Kalergi, and this is the guy, this aristocrat that founded the synarchist movement. His father was also a close friend of Theodor Herzl, founder of Zionism. Wow, what a coincidence. Synarchism and Zionism. Just like buddies, just like Neil Malin and George Bush, right? Buddies. At the beginning of 1924, we received a call from the Baron Louis de Rothschild. One of his friends, Max Warburg from Hamburg, it just happened to be a friend, Max Warburg from Hamburg, had read my book. This is Coudenhove Kalergi talking. There he is. See, he's half Japanese. Coudenhove Kalergi strove to sorry. Let's get back where I was. So, yes, they got a call from Louis de Rothschild, Baron Louis. One of his friends, Max Warburg from Hamburg, had read my book and wanted to get to know us. To my great surprise, Warburg spontaneously offered us 60,000 gold marks. Yeah, it happens every day. To tide the movement over for its first 3 years, Max Warburg, who was one of the most distinguished and wisest men I've ever come in contact with, had a principle of financing these movements. He remained sincerely interested in Pan-Europe for his entire life. Pan-Europe, that's Coudenhove Kalergi's actual project, and what is that other than the European Union? Pan-Europe. 1925. Max Warburg arranged his 1925 trip to the United States to introduce me to Paul Warburg and financier, drumroll, Bernard Baruch. Coudenhove Kalergi strove to replace the nationalist German ideal of racial community with the goal of an ethnically heterogeneous and inclusive European nation based on a communality of culture, a nation whose geniuses were, in Nietzschean terms, the great Europeans, such as Abbé de Saint-Pierre, Kant, Napoleon, Giuseppe Mazzini, Victor Hugo, and Nietzsche himself, who also cited Napoleon frequently as an example of the Superman. In addition to Nietzsche, Coudenhove Kalergi's intellectual influences included the fascist theories of German historian and philosopher Oswald Spengler. Spengler's most famous work, The Decline of the West, 1918, which drew on Nietzsche but mostly Goethe, outlined a notion of societal decay that became commonplace in fascist thought. Spengler's thesis was that all civilizations are subject to an organic cycle of birth, maturity, aging, and death. All civilizations reach an apex followed by irreversible decadence until the emergence of barbarism once again heralds the beginning of a new epoch. Typical to the cynicism of fascist thought, for Spengler, man is not good, but survives as a predator through aggression and destruction. It was through Coudenhove-Kalergi that St. Yves' vision of a synarchist European Union achieved serious political force when he co-founded the Pan-European Union with Archduke Otto von Habsburg. Otto's father was Charles I of Austria, the last ruler of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the nephew to Archduke Franz Ferdinand, whose assassination in 1941 precipitated World War I. The first person to join the Pan-European Union, you're not going to believe this, the first person to join the Pan-European Union was Hjalmar Schacht, later Hitler's Reich Minister of Economics, a member of the Round Table, and the actual author of Hitler's slave labor programs. His full name was Hjalmar Horace Greeley Schacht, and although born in Germany, he spent part of his early upbringing in Brooklyn and maintained powerful Wall Street connections. Schacht was a close friend of Montague Norman, chairman of the Bank of England, who was the godfather to one of Schacht's grandchildren. Montague Norman from 1933 through 1939 met repeatedly with Hjalmar Schacht to plan the financing of the Nazi regime and guided the strategies of Hitler's primary supporters, the Rockefellers, Warburgs, and Harrimans. The next topic is the Bank of International Settlements and how that all came about. What are we seeing here in trying to wrap up my three different themes tonight into one, put a bow on it for the evening? What we're seeing is that the idea of democracy as Americans have learned it, and people in the West, what we call Western Europe, believe in that they have a democracy or a social democracy. In many of their minds, it's a social democracy. But it's a democracy in which you can do what you want. And that is a minority view in the populations of the world. You think about that. Okay, how many countries in the world do people have the right to do whatever they want to? Basically, America, Commonwealth countries, Western Europe. It's not anywhere near a majority of the population of the planet. Most people living in a totalitarian state. Now, a totalitarian state can be a right-wing totalitarian state, or it can be a left-wing totalitarian state. And they play both ends against the middle. That's divide and conquer. That's the traditional route to wealth for people that don't want to work for a living. So you have to have a religion that goes along with that, and that religion basically is racism. That there are certain people that are better suited to run the world, and the rest of the world is better used as servants, if at all. And if the population needs to be culled, then it needs to be culled. And it's the duty of the wise ones, the ones that have the right genes to care for the whole world. It's a heavy burden to have to commit genocide here and there, to get rid of useless eaters that are in your way. But even, from Nietzsche, you can learn that there's pleasure to be found in blood sports and murder and all that stuff. And the golden rule is the only way that I can live. I mean, I can't live that way. It's, I say it's either the rule of gold or the golden rule. If you're playing like all I want out of life is as much as I can get, and let me die when I die, but I want to have a big pile of gold, or so many yachts and so many vacation homes. That's what I want, and I'll do anything to get it because humanity is basically evil, and it's right for me to take what I can from these evil people. And that kind of looking at humanity like that to me is repugnant, and I can't imagine a rational person looking at life that way. But they do. They have a completely different way of looking at it. They've got their Babylonian mindset and their Kabbalah and their pyramids and all of their silly symbols and signs and mystical garbage, Vril society and all that crap. No, we are the lucky ones. We're still living in freedom as long as we hang on to it. This is what our generation right now. This is our job right now is to recognize that the point of World War II was to preserve liberty, and if we don't, if we lose it, then I don't know how anybody's ever going to get it back. And I don't care if we lied, cheated, and stole to get that Constitution. We got a Constitution, and we need to we need to hang on to it because you'll never write a better one. You can you can quote me on that. All right, guys. Have a good night. Thanks for being with me.